In this video, I want to talk about what I consider bad practices in paragliding. Activities or maneuvers that some expert pilots perform and even post on social media, but without giving any prior explanation or warning that these shouldn't be replicated by less experienced pilots. Many of these actions have become normalized and are seen as part of a paraglider's learning process, when in fact, it's the opposite. Performing these practices, these maneuvers, these techniques can cause many beginners to have scares, incidents, or even accidents, and in the best case, only damage their equipment. It's best to avoid them, and when we see these practices from other pilots, we should recognize that they're either very skilled pilots who completely master what they're doing and are risking their lives, or reckless, imprudent pilots. I'll start with the ones I consider less serious or risky, and move toward the most dangerous ones, those that all pilots should avoid. In fact, I believe that some of these practices should be sanctioned by the authorities or the associations. Number 1. Spin landing. We'll start with spin landing. A spin landing is nothing more than, while on the ground, or just a few centimeters or 1 meter above it, forcing the paraglider to enter a negative spin, either before takeoff, while ground handling, or during landing. A negative happens when one side of the paraglider stalls and the wing spins like a helicopter. If this is done on the ground, it's not very dangerous, but it will cause damage to the wing. For example, here we can see a video published on Ojo Volador by Bicho Carrera, a very skilled acro pilot, who shows how to perform this spin landing. It's basically making the glider spin. The problem is that if the paraglider falls in this position on the ground, which is exactly what will happen when you're just learning the technique, you'll end up damaging the leading edge of your glider. If you repeat this several times, you'll significantly harm this important part of the wing. If the leading edge gets damaged, the paraglider becomes obsolete. The rest of the fabric might be in perfect condition, but if there's porosity or deformation in this part of the glider, it'll become dangerous to fly. Therefore, it shouldn't be flown. It doesn't take many mistakes to damage a paraglider's fabric, because the wing will hit the ground with force and speed. There will be friction with the surface, and the internal pressure inside the glider will also damage the internal ribs. So it only takes maybe 5 or 10 failed attempts to cause significant damage. If you do this often, your wing that could have lasted 3 years might last only 2 months. We're not talking about a $20 or $50 kite from AliExpress. We're talking about a $3,000 piece of equipment. So if we practice something that reduces the lifespan of our gear, we're literally losing hundreds or thousands of dollars. Even worse if we try this maneuver while landing or slightly above the ground, because in that situation, besides damaging the equipment, we could get injured. 1 meter of height is enough to hurt your ankles, knees, or spine. And I've seen pilots trying this technique for the first time hit the ground pretty hard. So I don't recommend practicing this maneuver. Not on the ground while controlling the glider, because it will damage it, and not in the air at low altitude, because you could hurt your joints badly. However, I do believe that this maneuver, when performed by an experienced acro pilot with a proper acro wing, is harmless for that pilot, under those conditions. If you're a pilot who wants to get into acrobatics, maybe this technique could be useful to learn negative spins or helicopters later on. But if you're a regular pilot who just enjoys normal flights, I don't recommend doing it. It won't teach you anything fundamental or useful for your everyday flying. It's just a showy trick that can end up being very costly. Number 2. Maneuvers at low altitude. Performing maneuvers or acrobatics close to the ground, near the terrain, cliffs, or mountains. That's something we must avoid, whether we're beginner students or even experienced pilots. If we don't perfectly master a maneuver, we should never perform it at low altitude. Maneuvers must be learned and perfected with plenty of height, ideally over a lake, over the sea, or over water, so that in case of an emergency, we can throw the reserve parachute or at least have a safer impact zone. That's the optimal way to learn a maneuver. If we don't have water nearby, at least we should have plenty of altitude. And by that, I mean 1,000 meters or more. That way, if something goes wrong, we'll have time to fix it or deploy the reserve. So we should never try to learn or perfect a maneuver without sufficient altitude, especially not close to a mountain or cliff. Now, it's true that we'll often see acro pilots performing basic to advanced tricks very close to the terrain. And that's normal. We'll see it anywhere in the world. But we need to understand that these pilots are experts who have performed those maneuvers thousands of times with lots of altitude until they reached such perfection that they can now do them near the ground with no margin for error. They didn't learn these maneuvers at low altitude, they perfected them over time, and now they perform them as show demonstrations. There are, however, some irresponsible pilots who do learn at low altitude. That's an example we should not follow. In dynamic flight zones, for example, near the sea where pilots rarely gain much height, some end up learning maneuvers in those conditions. Here in Miraflores, Lima, many of us learned basic and even intermediate maneuvers: wingovers, spirals, stalls, helicopters, loops, at low altitudes. But that's not something I recommend. There's also what I call the low-altitude paradox. What happens is that pilots who are not used to flying at high altitudes, say pilots who always fly dynamic or thermodynamic sites, when they attend an SIV safety course and suddenly have over 1,000 meters of altitude, they feel intimidated or even afraid of the height. As a result, they hesitate and don't perform maneuvers properly. However, when those same pilots fly low, they feel more confident and they become bolder or even reckless. For example, south of Lima, we have a small dune at the Paracas Reserve, about 20 or 25 meters high, but with strong wind, which allows long, low flights. Many accidents have happened there due to this paradox of low altitude. Pilots who never tried maneuvers at 200 or 300 meters in Miraflores suddenly feel safe at 25 meters, so they try things they've never done before, like wingovers, spirals, or sharp turns, and crash. We must avoid letting low altitude give us a false sense of safety or confidence to try things we normally wouldn't. In short, don't do acro at low altitude. You'll see other pilots doing it, but don't let that encourage you to copy them. Number 3. Standing on another paraglider. In some YouTube videos, we can see how popular it has become for one pilot to stand on another pilot's paraglider during flight. Even though it looks spectacular, it's something extremely dangerous that should never be attempted. And honestly, it doesn't even take great skill. There's very little merit in doing it, and a lot of risk. The only thing gained is attention, because it looks visually impressive. What are the risks? The main one, as you can imagine, is getting entangled with the other glider. When one pilot flies above another, the upper wing will always lose more altitude than the lower one, because the lower glider disturbs the air, creating interference, rotors, and vortices. Even if both pilots are flying identical wings with the same weight, the one on top will always sink faster and eventually fall into the lower glider. You could get tangled in the fabric or the lines, and escaping that situation is extremely difficult. If the pilot on top lets go, the one below could have a severe accident. If the top pilot holds on, both will fall together, and the glider carrying the weight of both will fall at a very high sink rate, hitting the ground hard and causing the lower pilot to get seriously hurt. Could they throw their reserves? Yes, but even so, it's an absurd, ridiculous situation that should never happen in the first place. So we should never try to stand on someone else's paraglider. And ideally, we shouldn't even fly intentionally close to others. Always maintain a safe distance. Number 4. Backflips. Doing a backflip, flying upside down, is something we don't see much anymore. But about 10 or 15 years ago, it was a common stunt among some pilots. It's not really a maneuver. It's just a silly trick, either on the ground or right after takeoff, trying to go head down. It doesn't require much flying skill, only some physical coordination. But it puts you at huge risk of an accident. Even when done on the ground while kiting, You could injure your neck or back, or even take off accidentally if you lose control of the brakes. If done in the air, it's even worse, because you need to let go of the brakes to flip upside down. If at that moment your glider collapses, turns, or flies downwind, you'll have no control. There was even a fatal accident years ago caused by exactly that. The pilot took off, let go of the brakes, flipped upside down, the glider collapsed, and both crashed. Luckily, this practice has mostly disappeared. I no longer see it in videos or in real life, but it's still worth reminding pilots to avoid such behavior. Here, I'd like to pause for a reflection. If we're instructors or advanced pilots, we are role models for those with less experience. Therefore, we have a responsibility not to engage in these bad practices, because beginner pilots will eventually try to imitate what they see. If we perform low passes or risky maneuvers just to show off, sooner or later a beginner will try to do the same, but without the same skill or experience. If we stand on someone else's glider, a novice might try it too, with disastrous results. As professionals and experienced pilots, especially as instructors, we must fly the way we want our students to fly. I doubt any instructor wants their students to fly dangerously low, stand on other gliders, or do flips in the air. So that's how we must fly, by example. If at some point we want to do a demonstration, we must clearly tell our students and observers that what we're doing is the result of years of experience, and that it's not something they should try or see as part of normal pilot progression. And as beginners, when we see these bad practices, we must be aware that this is not the path to follow. Not everything we see from advanced pilots, or even instructors, is worth imitating. We must use good judgment about whom we learn from and not feel pressured or influenced by the reckless behavior of others. Not every experienced pilot is a responsible one. We don't know how many accidents they've had, how many bones they've broken, or how many close calls they've survived. And I doubt anyone learns to fly with the goal of taking unnecessary risks. We all just want to enjoy this beautiful sport safely. Number 5. Getting out of the harness. Finally, what I consider the most absurd and dangerous practice, one that should even be prohibited and sanctioned, is unbuckling from the harness and standing on it completely disconnected. As ridiculous as it sounds, I still see this, even among instructors. This started with a video from more than 20 years ago called Fly Hard. In it, some expert pilots would unclip from their harnesses while flying low, in dynamic sights, and stand up mid-flight. But that video is over 20 years old, and this practice should now be completely banned. First, because it requires zero skill or merit, it doesn't demonstrate any flying ability, and second, because it puts your life at extreme risk. If the pilot trips, loses balance, or if the wing collapses, changes direction, or hits sink air, they will fall from a considerable height. A paraglider can't maintain flight at just 1 meter above the ground. Even minimum flight height is around 4 or 5 meters. That's already enough to break your legs, your spine, or die. From an accident physics perspective, falling from 3 times your own height is potentially fatal. The average person is about 1.70 meters tall, so a fall from over 5 meters, the minimum flight height, can kill you. Therefore, unbuckling your straps, getting out of your seat, and standing on the harness is a stupid stunt that could cost your life. And even worse is doing it in front of beginner pilots or students. If an instructor does this, they should be sanctioned, suspended, or expelled. Because anyone reckless enough to perform such a dangerous act doesn't deserve to be called a paragliding instructor. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. If you know of any other bad paragliding practices that no one should imitate, write them in the comments so we can discuss them. Thank you very much for watching until the end. I'll leave you with some accident analysis videos that might also be useful to you. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more content like this. And if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. That really helps with the algorithm. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video.